All right, so today we're diving into something pretty unique. A single source, just one sermon recording,
Okay.
but it presents this really fascinating argument about a divine timeline,
Yeah.
one that leads to the return of Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And the speaker, what they really focus on the role of Israel in all this,
Okay. Yeah.
drawing some pretty surprising connections between like biblical prophecy and actual historical events.
Interesting.
Now, just to be upfront, we're here to explore the content, how it all fits together.
Yeah.
We're not advocating for any specific belief system.
Right.
Think of this deep dive as like a journey through one person's interpretation of history and prophecy
Yeah, exactly.
and how they kind of weave it all together to reach their conclusions.
And then, it's up to the listener to decide what to make of it.
Right. So the speaker starts by laying out this like foundational idea.
Mm.
God made an eternal covenant with Abraham and his descendants,
Okay.
promising them the land of Israel. And then they go on to argue that God blesses those who bless Israel and, well, kind of curses those who curse it.
Mm-hmm.
And to support this, they bring up some pretty dramatic historical examples.
Like what?
Well, they point to these like ancient empires,
Mm.
the ones that opposed Israel,
Uh-huh.
the Egyptians, Assyrians,
Yeah.
Babylonians,
Yeah.
and of course, all of their eventual downfall.
Right. Right.
But they also highlight the enduring existence of the Jewish people
Yeah.
who have, survived centuries of persecution and exile.
It's true.
And the speaker uses these examples to argue that supporting Israel aligns with, well, divine favor.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is, and it definitely raises some questions about how we interpret history,
Yeah.
especially when we're looking at it through, a religious lens.
Mm-hmm.
But let's stick with the speaker's logic for a moment.
Okay.
To really get their argument, we need to understand this concept of the Jubilee year. It plays like a central role in their whole theory.
The Jubilee year.
Yeah, so as described in the Bible, it's this time of redemption and restoration that occurs every 50 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I've heard of that.
In the Old Testament, it was a time for returning land to its original owners, freeing slaves, forgiving debts, that sort of thing.
Mm.
And the speaker uses these Jubilee cycles as like markers in a prophetic timeline, connecting them to key events in Israel's history.
Interesting. So it's like they're suggesting that these 50-year cycles are somehow like embedded in the fabric of time.
Yeah, exactly, guiding us towards some predetermined outcome. And here's where things get really interesting. The speaker brings in this passage from Deuteronomy 29.22,
Okay.
which talks about a stranger from a faraway land witnessing the desolation of Israel before its eventual restoration.
Okay. So who do they connect this prophecy to?
Well, that's the surprising part. It's Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, really?
Yeah, the speaker claims that Twain, whose real name was Samuel Clemens,
Right.
unknowingly fulfilled elements of this prophecy. Well, they break down the meaning of Samuel. It means the Lord has heard.
Okay.
And then Clemens, which means the Lord has been merciful.
Interesting.
They connect these meanings to the Jewish people's prayers for a return to Jerusalem.
I see, yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. They point out that Twain actually visited Jerusalem in 1867.
He did.
And guess what? That was the first Jubilee year of restoration.
Wow.
After a long period of exile, it was a time when some Jewish people were starting to return to their, ancestral homeland.
That's pretty wild.
The speaker sees this as more than just a coincidence.
Yeah, I can see why.
They believe Twain's visit, combined with his name's biblical connotations, aligns with the prophecy from Deuteronomy.
It's a pretty elaborate interpretation. It makes you wonder about the role seemingly unconnected individuals might play in like a larger narrative.
Right. They're saying even seemingly random events can be part of this grand design if you look at it from the right perspective.
Okay, so now let's fast forward 50 years, another Jubilee cycle.
To 1917. What major event happened in Israel's history that year?
1917. Let's see. Oh, that was the year of the Balfour Declaration.
Exactly.
Great Britain, kind of a surprising move after centuries of imperial power, issued this statement expressing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine.
Right.
And that was really a turning point for the Zionist movement, paved the way for Israel's eventual statehood.
And, of course, the speaker ties this event directly back to their divine timeline theory.
Huh?
But they go even further, suggesting that the Balfour Declaration was actually foretold in the book of Isaiah,
Really?
specifically chapter 31, verses 5 and 6.
Okay.
This passage describes God shielding Jerusalem like birds flying overhead.
That's interesting.
The speaker interprets this imagery
Hmm.
in a fascinating way.
How so?
Well, they suggest that airplanes, a technology obviously not around in Isaiah's time, fulfill this ancient prophecy in a modern context.
Wow, that's the kind of detail that really makes you stop and think.
It does, right? Especially if you subscribe to the idea of prophetic fulfillment. Seeing a 20th century invention like the airplane reflected in a text written centuries earlier could be pretty powerful.
Yeah, I can see that.
But the speaker doesn't stop there. They bring up another intriguing detail. On the very day the Balfour Declaration was issued, the daily reading in the English lectionary happened to be that same passage from Isaiah 31.56.
Really? What a coincidence.
Well, the lectionary, for those who might not be familiar, is a predetermined schedule of scripture readings
Uh-huh.
used in many Christian churches.
Yeah.
It ensures, consistent engagement with the Bible throughout the year.
Oh, okay.
So according to the speaker, it's not just the Balfour Declaration itself that's significant,
Right.
but the fact that this specific passage about God's protection over Jerusalem was being read in churches on that very day all across the world.
Wow.
They see it as another piece of evidence pointing to, a divine hand at work in history.
So the speaker is building a case here, carefully connecting seemingly unrelated events and interpretations to create this really compelling narrative.
Yeah, they are. But remember, this is just one interpretation of these historical moments.
Of course, yeah.
And there's a lot more to unpack. But before we move on, I want to introduce another key figure in this whole story, Theodore Herzl.
Oh, Herzl, considered the father of modern Zionism, right?
Exactly. He had this dream as a young man. He claimed that the Messiah told him that he would prepare the Jewish people for their return to their homeland.
Interesting.
And he devoted his life to the Zionist movement, advocating for the establishment of a Jewish state.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting. In 1897, Herzl predicted that a Jewish state would be established within 50 years.
Within 50 years.
Yeah, perfectly aligning with another Jubilee cycle.
Wow, that's something else.
And remarkably, his prediction came true.
It did.
In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine,
Right.
effectively paving the way for the creation of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1948, Israel officially declared its independence.
A truly pivotal moment in history, especially for the Jewish people.
Absolutely. But wait, there's one more detail that kind of ties all of this together.
Yeah.
Remember the whole concept of the Jubilee year and how the speaker connects them to a divine timeline?
Yeah.
Well, on the day of the UN vote for Israel's statehood, the appointed reading in synagogues around the world was a passage from the book of Amos,
Okay.
specifically chapters 9, verses 11 through 15.
All right.
This passage speaks of God rebuilding David's fallen tent, a metaphor for the restoration of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and firmly planting them in their land.
Got it.
The speaker sees this as incredibly significant. Here you have the UN, this secular body, voting to establish a Jewish state precisely 50 years after Herzl's prediction,
Wow.
which itself fell on a Jubilee year.
That's incredible.
And on that very same day,
Yeah.
Jewish communities worldwide are reading a prophecy about Israel's restoration.
It's almost like the speaker is suggesting that God was orchestrating these events behind the scenes,
Right. Yeah.
using human actors to fulfill his ancient promises.
Exactly. And this brings us to a major turning point in the speaker's argument, the rebirth of Israel in 1948. They see this event not just as a political victory,
Mm-hmm.
but as a sign that this prophetic clock is ticking,
Uh-huh.
leading us closer to the return of Jesus Christ.
It's a powerful image, a nation reborn from the ashes of the Holocaust, defying all odds to reclaim its ancient homeland.
Yeah.
And for someone who believes in biblical prophecy, it must seem like irrefutable proof that God is at work in history.
Right. Guiding us towards, a predetermined outcome.
Right. So welcome back to our deep dive into this sermon all about Israel and biblical prophecy. Last time we left off with that pretty big claim, that Israel's rebirth in 1948 was this major turning point, like a sign that this prophetic clock, well, it was ticking.
Right. And they presented a pretty intricate web of connections, between biblical prophecy and historical events. And then, of course, those 50-year Jubilee cycles to kind of support their argument. So where does the speaker take us next?
Well, they delve a little deeper into this whole divine timeline idea.
Okay.
By pointing to other, key events in Israel's history after 1948. One they highlight is the Six-Day War in 1967.
The Six-Day War. That was a That was a major conflict in the Middle East.
It was.
Israel, facing threats from all these surrounding Arab nations, launched this preemptive attack
Right.
and ultimately emerged victorious.
Yeah.
Captured some significant territories.
They did, like the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank,
Yeah.
and most importantly, the city of Jerusalem.
Exactly. And for the speaker, well, this victory wasn't just some result of, military strategy or political maneuvering,
Yeah.
but rather a clear sign of God's intervention.
Right.
Okay, so they're seeing God's hand directly in the outcome of the war.
Yeah.
How do they connect that back to their whole theory about a divine timeline?
Well, remember how Jerusalem was divided after 1948?
Yeah.
With Jordan controlling the eastern part of the city, including, the old city with all its holy sites.
Mhm.
Well, for the speaker, Israel capturing Jerusalem in 67, that was a pivotal moment, fulfilling this prophecy about the city being reunited under, Jewish control before the end times.
That's a pretty specific interpretation. And I imagine for someone who really believes in all this and biblical prophecy, seeing Jerusalem reunited after nearly 2 decades of division must have felt like a major sign. But didn't Israel face a lot of criticism, internationally for capturing these territories during the Six-Day War?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The Six-Day War, it remains this controversial event, with lots of different perspectives on the causes, the consequences. But the speaker, well, they're really just focused on that outcome, seeing it through this lens of their theological worldview.
Yeah. It seems like they're, selectively choosing events that fit their narrative.
Yeah.
Interpreting them as evidence of some divine plan unfolding. But history is rarely so neat and tidy.
No, you're right. Historical events, they're complex, rarely have simple explanations.
Right.
But, remember, we're trying to understand how the speaker is constructing their argument, how they piece together this narrative that supports their, belief system.
Okay, that makes sense. So they use the Six-Day War and specifically, the reunification of Jerusalem as another marker on this divine timeline. What other events do they point to?
Well, the speaker also mentions the Yom Kippur War,
Okay.
which took place just a few years later in 73.
Right.
This war, launched by Egypt and Syria on, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, caught Israel totally off guard.
Yeah.
And initially resulted in, in significant losses for Israel.
The Yom Kippur War was a real shock to Israel.
Yeah.
It was like this moment when their sense of security, their military superiority was shaken.
Yeah.
But I thought they ultimately, repelled the attack, held onto their territory.
You did, yeah. Despite those initial setbacks, Israel, they managed to turn the tide of the war and secure a ceasefire. But the speaker, they focus on Israel's survival, in the face of overwhelming odds, seeing it as yet another example of God's protection, God's intervention.
It's interesting, how they take these events that could be seen as military or political victories and they interpret them through this completely different lens, attributing the outcomes to divine intervention. It's a reminder that our beliefs can really, shape how we perceive and understand the world around us.
Absolutely.
Even when we're dealing with something as concrete as historical events.
Right, and it highlights the power of narratives. The speaker's constructing a narrative that fits their worldview. Using specific events, specific interpretations to create this coherent and compelling story.
So even the Yom Kippur War, which was a pretty traumatic event for Israel, is woven into this narrative of divine purpose and protection. Does the speaker address any of the complexities or challenges that Israel's faced since its rebirth in 48?
That's a good question. The speaker does acknowledge the ongoing struggles and persecutions that Israel has faced, both from external enemies and internal divisions.
Okay.
But they interpret these challenges, not as contradictions to their theory, but rather as evidence of this spiritual battle that they believe is raging between good and evil.
Okay, so now they're bringing in this idea of spiritual warfare. Can you elaborate a little bit on what they mean by that?
Sure. So the concept of spiritual warfare, it's a core belief in some Christian denominations, and essentially, it posits that there's this invisible battle taking place between God and Satan, good and evil forces,
Right.
and that this battle, it manifests itself in the physical world, influencing individuals, nations, and even historical events.
So the speaker is seeing the conflict in the Middle East, not just as this geopolitical struggle, for land or resources, but as part of a much larger cosmic battle between good and evil.
Precisely. They believe that that Satan, the embodiment of evil, is actively working to undermine God's plan,
right?
Which includes, the restoration of Israel and the eventual return of Jesus.
That's a pretty intense perspective. It kind of casts the conflict in this very, very black and white light, with Israel representing good and its enemies representing evil.
You're right. It's a very stark worldview.
Yeah,
and it has implications for how the speaker views not only Israel's enemies, but also anyone who criticizes or opposes Israel's actions.
So they're not just talking about like armed conflict,
right?
But also any form of opposition to Israel.
Yeah.
Whether it's political criticism or economic boycotts, or even just expressing sympathy for the Palestinian cause.
Yes, the speaker sees all those actions as potentially aligning with the forces of evil, whether intentionally or not. They believe that anyone who opposes Israel is essentially hindering God's plan. And contributing to the spiritual battle against good.
It's a perspective that definitely simplifies a very complex situation.
It does,
and can lead to some pretty extreme conclusions.
Yeah.
But again, remember, we're just trying to understand the speaker's logic and how they construct their argument.
Right, and it's important to note that this belief in spiritual warfare, it's not unique to the speaker. It's a belief held by many people of faith, and it really shapes how they view current events, especially those related to Israel and the Middle East.
So even though the speaker is focusing on these specific historical events, their interpretations are grounded in this broader theological framework. The one that sees the world as this battleground between good and evil.
Yeah.
And for them, well, Israel's right at the center of that battle. Yeah. We've covered a lot of ground in this segment, from the Six-Day War to the Yom Kippur War, and then this whole concept of spiritual warfare. It's clear that the speaker sees a pattern in these events, like a divine plan unfolding amidst all the chaos and uncertainty of human history. But what are the implications of this belief system? Where does the speaker go from here?
Well, in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how the speaker connects these historical events.
Yeah.
And their interpretation of spiritual warfare to their ultimate conclusion.
Okay.
The imminent return of Jesus and the end of the world as we know it.
All right, now that's a cliffhanger. Stay tuned, deep divers, because things are about to get really interesting as we delve into the apocalyptic side of this sermon.
Yeah.
Welcome back, deep divers. We're in the final stretch now of our journey through this sermon about Israel and biblical prophecy. It's been quite a whirlwind. All these historical connections and theological interpretations, and then some pretty intense claims about a divine timeline. All leading up to the return of Jesus.
Right. We've seen how the speaker views Israel's existence and its, modern day conflicts as part of this larger spiritual battle, this cosmic struggle between good and evil. It's a worldview that definitely raises some eyebrows, but it's important to understand the speaker's logic,
right,
and how they connect the dots.
Exactly. We're not here to, endorse or debunk their beliefs, but rather to just explore how they make sense of the world through this very, very particular lens. So in this final part, let's delve into what the speaker sees as the ultimate outcome of this divine timeline. The end times.
Okay.
The speaker believes, based on their interpretation of biblical prophecy, that we are living in the last days.
The last days.
The period leading up to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And they see all the events we've discussed, the rebirth of Israel, the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, and the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. They see it all as signs that this prophetic timeline, it's unfolding.
So they're not just talking about a spiritual battle in some, abstract sense.
Right.
They're saying these events have a specific end goal.
Yeah.
The return of Jesus.
Yeah.
And the culmination of history as we know it.
Okay. So they're saying these events are not random occurrences.
No.
But rather part of a divinely orchestrated plan
Right.
leading to this climactic event,
Yeah.
often referred to as the end times or the apocalypse. Now, that word apocalypse, it often, conjures up images of like widespread destruction and chaos.
Hmm.
Is that the kind of scenario that the speakers are describing?
Well, they do draw heavily on, apocalyptic imagery and language from the Book of Revelation, which is known for those vivid descriptions of a final battle between good and evil,
Right.
culminating in, a new heaven and a new earth.
So there's this idea of, judgment, a reckoning where good triumphs over evil.
Right.
But it comes at a cost. It's a pretty intense concept,
Yeah.
especially, for those who might not be familiar with this kind of biblical interpretation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the speaker is quite clear that they believe this event is not just, a possibility, but an inevitability, a
Right.
divinely ordained conclusion to human history.
It's a perspective that offers both hope and fear.
Yeah.
Hope for those who believe they're on the side of good, and fear for those who are perceived as being on the wrong side of this cosmic battle. But where do we fit into all of this?
Mhm.
The listeners, what's the speaker's message to those hearing this sermon?
Well, the speaker's message is one of urgency
Urgency.
and a call to action.
A call to action.
They believe that time is running out,
Okay.
that the signs are all around us,
Right.
and that people need to make a choice
Make a choice.
to align themselves with God and His plan, or, well, face the consequences of opposing His will.
So it's not just about like passively observing these events
No.
or, intellectually understanding this interpretation of prophecy.
Right. Yeah.
They're actively encouraging people to take a stand, to choose a side in this spiritual battle.
Exactly. They emphasize the importance of repentance, of turning away from sin
Right.
and embracing a life of faith of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
They believe this is the only way to ensure salvation and escape the coming judgment.
It's a message that carries a lot of weight,
It does.
especially for those who share the speaker's belief system.
Okay.
It's a call to action. It's a warning about the consequences of inaction and, well, a promise of hope for those who choose to believe.
Right.
But for those who don't share these beliefs, it can feel pretty intense, even alienating.
You're right. And it's important to remember that this is just one interpretation of biblical prophecy.
Right.
There are many different perspectives within Christianity, and not everyone subscribes to this particular view of the end times.
Even within Christianity, there's this wide range of views on how the end times might unfold.
Yeah.
So people interpret the book of Revelation, literally,
Yeah.
while others see it more symbolically.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are those who, well, they don't believe in a literal end time scenario at all.
Right. It's crucial to acknowledge that diversity of interpretations,
Yeah.
even within a single faith tradition, and that's why it's so important to approach these topics with an open mind and a critical lens.
So we've explored the speaker's argument for a divine timeline leading up to the return of Jesus, and their belief that we are, well, living in the last days. It's a perspective that's both fascinating and challenging,
It is.
offering a glimpse into, how some people make sense of history, current events, and their place in the universe.
It's a reminder that our beliefs,
Yeah.
they shape our understanding of the world in these really profound ways, and that even within a single faith tradition,
Right.
there can be this wide range of interpretations and perspectives.
As we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we encourage you to reflect on what you've heard, what resonated with you,
Yeah.
what challenged your existing beliefs,
Right.
and how do you make sense of this complex relationship between faith, history, and the future.
Remember, this is just one person's interpretation. The beauty of these deep dives is that they expose us to these different ways of thinking,
Right.
encouraging us to engage with complex topics and grapple with the big questions that have always fascinated humanity.
And that's what it's all about, right? Exploring, questioning, and expanding our understanding of the world around us. So keep those minds open, deep divers, and keep searching for those nuggets of knowledge that spark your curiosity and challenge you to think differently. Until next time.